Brego, least-loved son of a mother of one, slid a small pile of coins across the bar to the man who would soon end his life. Before the moon, called Luca's Eye by the locals, slid its silver iris below the horizon, Brego of Lakebridge would look down in astonishment as his lifeblood flowed freely into the soil. Of course, if Brego had known this fate, he would not have paid his last 4 copper bits to the bushy-browed man across from him. Perhaps he would have run, for it would not have been the first time he had run out on a tab. Or perhaps he would have pulled a knife, for it would not be the first time he had given steel to someone who expected copper. Brego was a man with little sense, less money, and no backbone. Indeed, if the barkeep of the Trollhide Inn and Tavern knew he would be killing Brego this night, he likely wouldn't even have asked for Brego to pay. Why ask the poor bastard to empty his purse if you knew you were going to knife him anyway? It just seemed excessive. In the end, the knowing of fate is a task best left to priests and charlatans. Brego, though he shared a certain kinship with the latter, was just a humble layabout, and he had to piss. As he left the copper coins on the bar gleaming dully in the firelight, Brego stumbled out the door into the humid summer air of Lakebridge. The night's chill had brought only scant relief to the residents of the sprawling town, turning sweltering heat into swampy warmth. He turned right and walked down the graveled path to the back of the tavern, where he would not be easily spotted by anyone on the main street. He untied the frayed strings of his leggings and leaned forward to put his arm on the cobblestone wall in front of him. Over the sound of his relieved sighing, he heard a sharp scraping noise and a heavy grunt of exertion. To his left, down a narrow alleyway, he saw 2 bulky shapes bent over a crate. Upon focusing, which was no easy task for Brego, the shapes resolved themselves into the silhouettes of 2 men, one of which had one knee on the ground and was breathing heavily. Both had the stocky builds of dock workers or laborers. There were plenty of these types to be found here, given that the town served as a large fishing and trading hub. Lakebridge was built around the calm waters of Lake Silica before it turned into a series of rapids and strong rivers that wound their way east and emptied into the sea. Silica Bridge, the town's namesake, was the last civilized place for trading caravans to cross the mountains into the lowlands of Rhesia beyond. A more enterprising caravan master might choose to avoid the tolls and tariffs of Lakebridge and take their chance fording one of those angry rivers, known as Silica's Ladies, to the southeast. However, despite the high expense of the tolls, these attempts were rare. The locals had a favorite piece of ribaldry: better to pay the matron than get stiffed by her ladies. Brego finished his business and wandered haltingly down the alleyway towards the men. He kept his arm on the wall to his right, borrowing its blessed stability to keep him upright. Having taken jobs at the docks many times, Brego thought it likely he would know these men and could lend them a hand. In exchange for a coin or 2, of course. As he neared, Brego's ale-addled mind didn't register the thick, sturdy leather vests and leggings of the men. He didn't stop to think that this was certainly not the light, breathable linen usually worn by the city's laborers in the summer. Where Brego's fellows might tie gloves or tools to their belts, these men had strapped daggers, each with hilts that were well made and well worn. Let the Duke's princelings and bootlickers parade around their jewel-encrusted longswords and ornate rapiers. These men, experienced cutthroats and brigands both, knew their business, and swords were no good in the cramped space of an alleyway. "I can spare a hand if e'en you can spare a copper," Brego said with his best crooked smile. The man closest to Brego, who had fallen now to both knees, held his left arm in front of him, right hand gripped tight around his wrist. He stared with gritted teeth and wide eyes at the fingers of his left hand. The skin there was an angry bubbling red, as though he had just tried giving a handshake to a bed of hot coals. Around his blistered skin were patches of coarse, brown hair that was thick, like animal fur. The small patches grew sporadically all around the hand. It was still spreading, bursting through his skin in ragged, bloody clumps. The man opened his mouth to let out a panicked cry, but what emerged was a shrill moan. The sound was like a loud horn being played by an overexcited child, vaguely musical but entirely inhuman. The call of a frightened animal. Brego's dumbfounded shock at seeing a hand grow God's damned fur in front of him was soon supplanted by what he saw in the crate behind the howling man. Bones, long and thick and white, each cleaned of any attachments to the viscera and tissue that once clung to them, each larger than Brego's forearm, each bundled together with cord, a half-dozen or so bones in each bundle. The bundles of bones were packed to the rim of the large crate, which was about 3 feet high and wide enough to cover almost the entirety of the alleyway. Bone thieves, smugglers. Brego's eyes widened as the implications of what he was seeing pierced the cloudy, alcoholic veil over his mind. There was no toll or tariff for those who tried to take bones through Lake Bridge, only a sham trial and swift execution. Brego looked up to see the second man, who was on the other side of the crate, and had removed his dagger from its sheath, recover from his own shock and scramble around towards him. The man was frantic and yet careful, sliding sideways, step by step, through the narrow space between the crate and the nearby walls. He was desperate to get to Brego, and yet terrified to get near the crate. The man's caution gave Brego a chance to turn and run back down the alley. However, anyone who has had the good fortune to see the hilarity that is a drunken sprint might very easily guess Brego's success in fleeing the smuggler. Brego crashed headfirst into the floor of the alley, scraping cheeks and palms against the rocky soil. Hearing the approaching footfalls of the smuggler behind him, he rolled onto his back. Brego had weaseled his way out of countless debts, which had inevitably given him a sterling education in the art of being chased and fighting from the ground. As the smuggler ran towards him, dagger in hand, Brego brought one leg towards his chest, a line of blood dribbling down his leg from where the ground had cut his knee. He held his leg below the knee, plastering on a pained wince and exaggerated grimace. Through squinted eyes, he waited until he saw his pursuer had gotten closer. The smuggler, seeing an easy target, raised the dagger into the air to deliver a downward thrust into the sprawled Brego. Brego kicked out fiercely, using the ground as leverage. His kick was aimed for the primary target of all dishonorable alley fights, the groin. The hunter-turned-huntress gave out a high-pitched wail, not all that dissimilar from the one delivered from his hairy-handed friend only a few moments ago. This one, though, was distinctly more human. The smuggler's dagger clanged onto the ground as he fell, breathless, to his knees, instinctively cupping his hands over his mashed berries. Brego took this opportunity to stand, the alleyway spinning around him. He closed his eyes to combat the dizziness. Upon opening, they met the eyes of his fated killer. The barkeep's thick eyebrows were narrowed in anger as he plunged his knife, twin to the daggers of the two smugglers, into Brego's stomach. The barkeep used his free hand, a massive hairy-knuckled paw, to grip Brego's head around the mouth, locking his head in place with a vice grip, while also blocking any screams from escaping the dying Brego. Out and in. Out and in. The barkeep stabbed Brego until he began to go limp and dropped to the ground. Brego, who was quite confused as to how he had woken up on the ground just now, looked down towards his stomach. He stared in puzzlement as a strange crimson liquid leaked from him into the ground below. As his vision blackened, he heard a growl from above him. "What in Urse's hairy cock have you fuckwits done now?" "Cricks touched the bones," a wheezy, pained voice replied. "He's back there. I think he's already going feral. This guy wandered up while I was, helping Cricks. Interrupted the amputation. On my bones, boss, I'll fix this." Do it, quickly, or you'll help Crix by being his first meal. Brego lay on the ground, trying to remember if he had paid his bar tab. He was thinking of ways he could avoid paying as he drifted off into a deep, endless sleep.